You remember he used to just take off, no call, nothing? You remember, Charlie?
They've always had trouble.
One time, he just up and left without a word. I told Vi, I said, you pack that son of a bitch's bags and have them waiting for him on the front porch. And you know I always liked your father.
I know.
No, I always liked your father. You know that. I introduced Vi and Bev, for God's sake.
You did not introduce
them.
Troubles loom large in August, Osage County. A new play by Chicago Steppenwolf Theatre, last year's biggest hit on Broadway, which has just arrived at the National Theatre in London. Pill-popping and alcoholism, rancour and regret. It's a bitter and bleakly funny saga of family meltdown.
When Beverly took off like that without saying anything, without a note even, my first obligation was to look after my sister, don't you?
You don't have an obligation to do anything.
I have an obligation to look after my sister.
You are not obliged to get involved in someone else's marriage.
Well, not any marriage, but when they're married to my big sister, I sure as hell do.
It's inspired by actual events in my family. It's not purely autobiographical, but the inciting incidents, the disappearance of the patriarch and the matriarch's spiral into drug addiction come from my family. From my grandfather committed suicide when I was 10, and that event has had a lot of ripples in my family, a lot of effects throughout the generations for 30 years now, something I've carried around for a long time. And every family has some element of darker history.
Women are beautiful when they're young and not after. Oh. Men can still preserve their sex appeal well into old age. I don't mean those men like you see with shorts and those little purses around their waist, undignified. Some men can maintain, if they embrace it, cragginess, weary masculinity. Women just get old and fat and wrinkly.
I beg your pardon?
When it was obvious that the play was huge and had a much larger impact than anyone expected, people started talking about taking it somewhere. Well, none of us were particularly interested in Broadway, to be perfectly honest, but we all wanted to come to the National.
None of us are really stars. You know, they brought the Chicago production intact, which is very rare in New York and extremely rare on Broadway. And so that carried with it a certain sort of thing. We were sort of our own entity unto ourselves, and people didn't know us. I mean, several of us had appeared in New York or on film and television, but we were not stars. We did not stand out.
The producers of this play in New York took a great risk. It's very unusual to see on Broadway a new American play without any movie stars, 3.5 hours long. It's a tough sell. And so we didn't have any expectation that the play was going to, that it was going to do what it did. It was just what the theater needed in terms of something that was both a critical and a commercial success.
You're about as sexy as a wet cardboard box.
It was like being at a rock concert. It was screaming and yelling and cheering and whistling and jumping to the feet at the end of the night, and people on the sidewalks waiting for us with no stars. We have no recognizable names in our play, and people waiting outside, and so many of them saying, "That's my family." I was astonished at how many people would say, "That's my mother."